Hi, welcome to Removing Financial Barriers to Post-Secondary Success. My name is Blake Nance, and I'm the Senior Associate with the Data Research and Advanced Analytics team at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Today, we will delve into the financial challenges affecting Kentucky students and how reducing these barriers will increase student success. Discussion topics include the challenges in addressing student basic needs, CP's latest report on focus on unmet need, increasing student retention and completion, and trends around need-based aid. A couple of housekeeping things. This meeting will be recorded. You can put your questions in the Q&A section of this Zoom at any time, and we will get to those at the end of today's discussion, depending on how much time that we have available. Now, to introduce our speakers today, we have Dr. Christopher Ledford. He is a graduate of political science at the University of Kentucky and is the Associate Director of Data and Advanced Analytics at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. Prior to CPE, he served as the Director of Institutional Effectiveness at Bluegrass Community and Technical College, where he was a key member of the data team that helped improve retention and student success, as well as produced award-winning research on student basic needs, student communication tools, and the importance of demographic representation in the classroom. We also have Dr. Lily Masson-McKinley with us. Lily is the Executive Director of the Student Success Collaborative at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. Lily has worked in higher education for over 15 years in an array of areas, including crisis counseling, community engagement, access and success support, career development, and strategic partnerships. Lily received her doctorate in higher education leadership and policy from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Kirsten Turner is also with us. Dr. Turner is the Vice President for Student Success and Chief Student Affairs Officer. A leader with a long tenure at the University of Kentucky, she transitioned to her current position after serving in multiple associate provost roles and as an architect of the institution's strategies to improve retention and graduation rates. Dr. Turner earned her PhD at the University of Virginia's Curry School of Education in the Center for the Study of Higher Education. So those are our speakers for today. We are now going to get into our questions for the speakers. So first to Dr. Ledford, there has been an uptick in post-secondary research around unmet financial need. What is unmet financial need?
Hey, Blake. Thanks for the warm introduction and for hosting us today. You asked a great question. There's definitely been a surge in research around unmet financial need. In the early 2000s, economic recessions really put a strain on our post-secondary institutions across the country. And facing these budget challenges, those institutions had to raise fees, tuition, et cetera. All the while, undergraduate enrollment was kind of flat or declining. And those two factors together really prompted a lot of post-secondary researchers to get interested in college affordability. In other words, answering the question of whether costs were affecting enrollment. That cost factor at the bottom line is what we measure as unmet financial need. Now, I'm going to have some slides dropped into the chat, and if you look at slide 2, folks in the audience, there's a really great graphic there of what unmet financial need is and how it's calculated. But to explain along as you're looking, unmet financial need is the out-of-pocket cost that students must pay for college after taking into account any financial aid, scholarships, awards, and their expected family contribution. So when you think about enrollment behavior, unmet financial need represents that financial decision point, that tipping point where students either have to figure out, do I take a loan to cover what I need to pay? Do I find some other way to pay for it? Or critically, and what we don't want for those of us interested in student success, do I drop out? So if affordability concerns are indeed pricing out or influencing student behavior, we would expect to see a relationship between that unmet need indicator and enrollment behavior. Thanks.
Thank you. So when we talk about financial aid, you hear a lot of different words when it comes to what it costs to go to college. So how does unmet need kind of connect with cost of attendance and out-of-pocket expenses?
Sure, that's a great segue. So to recap, unmet financial need is an individual student level indicator that really represents the out-of-pocket financial cost or lack thereof that each student faces. For institutional leaders at the aggregate level, unmet financial need indicators help us understand the affordability barriers facing all of our students and just how high at the aggregate those barriers are. Now, I also mentioned cost of attendance, which is part of that unmet financial need calculation. But by itself, it doesn't consider financial aid. It doesn't consider those awards or the students or their families' ability to pay. So without those inputs, without knowing how aid and other factors are fluctuating or ebbing and flowing with total cost of attendance, we can't accurately gauge how affordability or how those costs are affecting students at the bottom line. And that unmet financial need indicator helps us understand that. Thanks.
Thank you. And now that we've kind of defined what unmet need is, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Lily Massey-McKinley on student basic needs and how unmet need can play into this. So welcome, Dr. Massey-McKinley. Hi. So the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative is doing so many great things, but one of their areas they're focused on is student basic needs. Can you explain to us what this is?
Yes, I'm happy to. Yeah, the Student Success Collaborative, when we launched in October of 2021, the first thing that we did was we started meeting with campus partners across the state and just listening to what were the common priorities and the common challenges that they were facing on their campuses. And student basic needs quickly rose to the top as one of the most common challenges being faced by students and institutions who are trying to best serve them, ultimately to help them complete their credentials and degrees. So this really got us started in trying to wrap our arms around, really just what's the current state picture here in Kentucky related to student basic needs, both understanding kind of national context, best practices, as well as our enrolled students here on campuses. We did put together an infographic. So I have a few slides just to kind of set some context for everybody that I will run through relatively quickly here. So student basic needs is the unmet need that it very strongly correlates with overall, if the cost of college includes your housing and your food and your transportation and your books and supplies, and a student has an $8,000 balance, then that is going to be, that's a bill that they're going to have to figure out how to pay through work and through other sources of income that are going to make them potentially have to choose ultimately between completing their educational goals and being able to meet their basic needs. So basic needs includes a variety of things. I mean, it includes your food and your food security, as well as housing security, transportation, childcare, technology, all sorts of these non-academic factors that are really important to allowing students to focus on their education and ultimately be successful in school. Nationally, about 3 out of 5 college students experience basic needs insecurity. We also know from the national research that students of color are more likely to experience basic needs insecurity. They're also less likely than their white counterparts to seek support from campus to assist with any of these needs. This is also a direct contributing factor to the growing mental health challenges and crises experienced by current college students. As if you can imagine, not knowing if you're going to be able to pay your rent, or if you're hungry and you don't really have enough food to either fill your gas tank or go to the grocery store, those are very stressful situations to be placed in as a young adult or a parent of a parenting student. So basic needs insecurity certainly leads and jeopardizes student success. What we see is that students are 25% more likely to drop a class, and they have a higher likelihood of failing a class. When students do pause their education for financial reasons, only 20% will eventually graduate. And in Kentucky, while unmet need really affects all students, middle income students, low income students, those students that receive a Pell Grant are considered those with the greatest financial need on our campuses. And they may have a harder time filling that gap, filling that unmet need. So what we've seen is that 60% of students within our community colleges roughly are receiving a Pell Grant. And while completing a post-secondary credentialing degree is a great pathway out of poverty, we have seen our enrollment decline among this really key population of students. We've been doing some work in trying to increase access to public benefits for students. And there's some really wonderful work going on with a collaboration of 45 or so statewide partners, including our higher education institutions, the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the Department for Community-Based Services, several nonprofit organizations in the state. And really what we're looking at is how do we increase access to post-secondary education for increase access to basic needs supports for current students and increase access to post-secondary education for individuals receiving public benefits. So as you can see from this slide, the ROI on a higher education credentialing degree is strong. And individuals that are receiving SNAP benefits that graduate from a KCTCF program, within 1 year, more than 80% are either continuing their enrollment in education or they're earning over 200% of the federal poverty line, which we know as they continue to gain work experience, their wages will continue to increase as well. We can also see from this bottom chart that a vast majority of individuals who are receiving public benefits do not have a secondary education. And so that is where increasing that pipeline is a really important factor of our work. And all of this is essential to the 60 by 30 goal that we have in Kentucky, especially to think about the equity element of ensuring that students have the supports that they need based on their own current and individual circumstances in order to be successful. So that was just the context that I wanted to share around what is student basic needs and how it's really directly related to the unmet need that students might have related to the full cost of attendance.
Thank you. And it is really interesting to see how, financial need can affect a student holistically in their experience in college. And thank you for that kind of context of what student basic needs is. So to summarize, how would you say that unmet financial need really plays into student basic needs?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, students, they don't color their money all that much. They either have enough or they don't have enough. And when you have maybe an outstanding tuition bill, you've got your rent coming due, you would like to go to the grocery store to, as affordably as possible, feed yourself and maybe your family if you are taking care of dependents. That's just the unmet need is the balance at the end of the day, that students have to work increasing numbers of hours in order to help pay down. And it's definitely a risk factor for students being successful and being able to complete their educational goals, which ultimately is the pathway out of poverty. And so that should be our goal, to do whatever we can to support students as their students based on the needs that they bring to the table. In order so that they no longer, that they can have that financial self-sufficiency and upward economic mobility.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to talk to Dr. Kirsten Turner from the University of Kentucky. Dr. Massey McKinley gave us a good job of looking at how financial wellness of a student kind of affects them holistically while they're in college. I wanted to ask you, why does unmet financial need matter for student success, from an outcomes perspective, such as retention and graduation rate? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks so much, Blake, and thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with everyone today and appreciate the opportunity. we know, at least at UK, the way that we think about this is we believe that there are 4 reasons why students persist or why they might not be able to make it. And financial stability is one of those 4. So when we look at the different kind of confounding factors, we look at academic preparation, we look at belonging and fit, community kind of based issues, we look at mental and physical well-being, and then that 4th kind of factor for us is financial stability. And we started our work, gosh, about 2016 or so. And what we looked when we were looking at our data was that students who had $5,000 or more of unmet need at UK, and fast forward now, when we've worked with other universities on this, that number is different for for each institution. It is impacted by the total cost of attendance. It's also impacted by the type of students and the socioeconomic status background from which the students come from. But for our UK students, we recognize that through quite a bit of data analytics, that students with $5,000 or more of unmet need were less likely to persist, irregardless of academic preparation or input. So if you had 2 students who looked academically prepared at the same rate, so and these are imperfect measures, but just for the sake of argument, looking at, say, ACT scores and high school GPA, and if they had equitable or equal preparation in terms of those scores and that GPA, over time, the students with $5,000 of unmet need were less likely to persist, irregardless if you held all the other kind of variables at bay. And so what that taught us and what that told us is that for certain students, that unmet need barrier at that level was too much to overcome, and they wouldn't persist at all or at the rate that we wanted them to. So we know that you can isolate out variables like unmet need, and for cohorts of students, that can be the thing that trips them up. So trying to think about how do you reduce that so that you can remove that barrier and ultimately get more students to cross that stage and go on into the Commonwealth with that undergraduate bachelor's degree was really important to us to do so.
Thank you. I know that retention is a very collaborative effort at the University of Kentucky. Can you kind of talk to how this issue led to the creation of the UK Leads program?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. This work started. We've been working on retention and graduation since we started back in 1865. But about right around 2016, our board of trustees and our president really pushed the institution to think about moving our retention and our graduation numbers up. We had been kind of stable in the low 80s, high 70s, low 80s for about 10 years for a first year to second year retention rate, and in the low 60s in a 6-year graduation rate. And so we underwent a massive kind of restructuring. And one of the key things that we did during that restructure was really think about data analytics and the power of data to help guide us in terms of looking at what our students are doing and what they and what might trip them up. Part of that that kind of restructure and that kind of laser focus was a meeting that we started having weekly to really focus on retention. And we started with retention because if you can't get them to the first year or to the second year or to the third year, you're not going to get to that graduation. So we really, really wanted to focus on retention at first, that first year to second year retention. And that weekly meeting at the time only had about 10 people around the table. Fast forward now, 6-7 years later, we've got about 80 people around that table every single Friday, really focused on retention. And we start each one of those meetings with the data. So we look at the data every single week and try to think about what are the issues that are impacting our students and what might be tripping them up. Early on, within that first year, that year of 2016, unmet need really just kind of shouted at us from the data as one of the main reasons why our students weren't persisting. So they had the ability to be here. They had the preparation. They had not all. I mean, this is generalizations, but and they had the community and the fit. They had the physical well-being, the mental well-being. But we had a cohort of students that didn't have it in terms of the unmet need. So we started to run some simulations. We used some data modeling. We trained a model to help us predict that if we got those students below that 5,000 number, which was what the LEADS program was, we hypothesized if we took a cohort of students and we were able to scholarship them through internal funds down to not wipe out their unmet need completely. In a perfect world, we would have done that. But our hypothesis was, could we just get them below that $5,000 threshold? They would still have some unmet need, but it would be below that 5,000. And that was our hypothesis. And we simulated that. We actually gave students, we took a cohort of students and gave them enough money to get them below that 5,000. And then we said what would happen. And those students came back. They actually out-predicted our model. And over the last several years, that program, that original pilot program, has turned into our UK LEADS initiative, which now is in 6th or 7th year of implementation, where we try to really scholarship our students, that the model tells us, if not for these finances, they would probably not persist, and then try to scholarship them down below that 5,000. It has been very, very successful for us, and it has contributed to our retention and graduation increases. So we are knocking on the door this year. We still have a couple more weeks, but we think we will hit that 70%, which was what our goal was in 2016. We think we will hit it this year in terms of our 6-year graduation rate. And we are hoping to be at 87% at our 1st year to 2nd year retention rate next fall, as we march towards 90. A big chunk of that has been the UK LEADS program, which came out of this scholarshiping down the unmet need to less than 5,000.
Thanks, Dr. Turner, for that information. Blake's having some audio issue. Are you back, Blake? Well, he sent me a question in our chat, so I can go on until he's back. So Blake sent me a question, wanted me to kind of talk about how we take the lessons learned from UK LEADS to provide value for the Commonwealth. And, so you just heard a lot about that great work going on at the University of Kentucky. And most importantly, it's making a difference. At the aggregate level, UK is still moving the needle on already high retention rates since the implementation of LEADS. And at CPE, when we heard that same success story that you just heard, when Dr. Turner and her team told us this information and we saw those outcomes, we challenged ourselves to work with all of our institutional partners to expand information, collaboration, and strategies around unmet financial need. We have in Kentucky a strong network of IR departments, and as a result, this state has the best longitudinal data system in the nation. Perhaps a better question, I think, would be why not? We can investigate how unmet financial need is affecting literally every student in the state over time and provide that information to our stakeholders at our institutions and in government. And that's exactly what we're up to, working together with our institutional folks to build on that research that you just heard about to make a difference and to help students. That's the bottom line in all of this. To our knowledge, we built a first of its kind statewide model that estimates the relationship between unmet need and retention of first-time students. And we looked at that information over the past decade and in all sectors. Again, I want to remind you that some of this is on slides and you get the link to our full research paper at the beginning of the chat. But just to summarize, our findings were stark. Just like what you heard from Dr. Turner and the UK LEADS project, we found that across the state in our public institutions, over the past 10 years, roughly 70% of first-time Kentucky students had some unmet financial need. This is a vast issue. Among those students with unmet financial need, we found that the median amount, or at the 50th percentile, for first-time students at research universities in Kentucky just last year was a little over $11,000. At our regional comprehensive universities, it was just under $10,000. And at our community colleges, it was just about $6,400. Those are on slides 3, 4, and 5 in that abbreviated slide deck you have. The key takeaway there, we've got a vast issue, and it's a substantive and costly issue for many students. One thing I do want to say that stuck out to us in our research, we should applaud, and many of the folks that should be applauded are here on this call today. We should applaud the efforts that are going on our campuses to use those institutional dollars to help students. We found an abundance of evidence that institutional grant awards and other small awards were helping to reduce unmet need, and that those small to moderate awards have increased the proportion of students with zero need over time. So more students with zero need over time. However, the kind of inverse of that at the other end of the spectrum is that the proportion of students at the highest amount of need, $15,000 plus, has doubled from 7 to 14%. Those students are also more likely to be low income and minoritized. So we have an equity issue. We have a vast issue, we have a costly issue, and we have an equity issue. So now that we've kind of described that for the state as a whole, the important thing, like at UK, was to figure out how unmet need is impacting retention. And again, we looked at first-time student retention to a second year because, as Dr. Turner mentioned, that's when students are at their most vulnerable state, right? If we can get them to retain to a second year, wrap around them with some financial training, some assistance, and get them more comfortable in a post-secondary situation, we stand a much larger chance of helping them walk across that stage. In our research across all institutions, we found that each $1,000 increase in unmet need decreased the probability of retention from a first to a second year by about 1%. And that's a pattern that we see at our four-year public research institutions as well. At the regional comps, we found that that rate of decline jumped to about a 1.5% decrease in retention likelihood for each $1,000 increase in unmet need. And then at our community colleges, that rate of decline jumped to about 2.4% for each $1,000 increase in unmet need. Those are on slides 8, 9, and 10 in the deck that I put in the chat. But if you think about it, and it just worked out to about the same for our institutions, we found that if you took those percentage points for each increment of unmet need, that means that the median student, the average ordinary student, is already about 15% less likely to retain compared to the student with zero unmet need. And remember, 50% of students in those calculations are still beyond those figures. Finally, just like I mentioned earlier, with the sheer cost of unmet need, we found that the impact of unmet need raises an equity question. And that's on slide 11 in that deck. As unmet need increases, there's a much more stark and precipitous impact on retention likelihood for URM and low-income students compared to their peers. However, equally telling and just as important in our research, we found that when unmet need is zeroed or is zero or has been zeroed with some institutional award or some grant funding, that low income and minoritized students are as likely or more likely to retain than the general student population. That's powerful. Think about that. When all else is equal and unmet need is zeroed, low income and minoritized students are equally or more likely to retain than their counterparts. That's powerful stuff to think about. To wrap it up, the important question is then, okay, what do we do with all this stuff? Well, the key thing is we have to collaborate, share information and best practices. And I'll go back to Dr. Turner's example about starting with 10 folks at the table and getting 80 folks at the table. We have built out models for all of our public institutions that look like the ones in the materials that you have. Let's work together. Let's work together to understand how unmet financial need is impacting students across the Commonwealth and at your institutions. But more importantly, let's create opportunities to collaborate, to identify in real time, using that predictive analytics to identify in real time those students who are facing barriers and help them before we lose them. We have built and tested a robust predictive model that will much like what they're using at UK, that will identify students who are most likely to retain if they had some sort of some financial assistance. Let's work together and let's figure out best practices on how to use those data to impact student success. Our goal is to take that information and put it back out to our folks and help you target students, increase their success and ultimately their long-term well-being. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I apologize for my brief disappearance due to technical difficulties, but I just wanted to emphasize how important collaboration is when it comes to student success and retention. And, I wanted to share why Dr. Turner was talking that those roundtable discussions on Friday for retention are very insightful. And, I think to Dr. Lefford's point, collaboration is super important when we're tackling these topics. One final question I wanted to ask each of our speakers, and we'll go down the line. So I'll start with Dr. Lily Masta-McKinley, is from your own perspective, why is reducing unmet need important for students and for post-secondary education in Kentucky?
Well, I think that the equity issue component of this is really one of the most compelling issues for me, and wanting to ensure that our students from low-income backgrounds or families, as well as students of color, first-generation students, students in rural areas, parenting students, that they have all the resources and supports that they need in order to be successful. Because ultimately, when you do step on a college campus and enroll in a post-secondary program, you're doing that because you have goals, and you have dreams, and you want a better life for yourself and your family, and future generations after you. And so we have so many students that make that step and that they come onto our campuses, and then life gets in the way, and life is very challenging, and there's a lot going on. And yet, against so many odds, they are there and they're working hard. And so I think that part of the collaborative aspect of the basic needs work is figuring out, how do we bring together so many different resources to support our students? How do we bring in some capacity support, perhaps, from our Cabinet for Health and Family Services partners, who do this all the time, who really do a case management approach to supporting our most vulnerable populations? How do we access additional emergency aid dollars that can help a student with a relatively small, unexpected emergency that could derail them completely from their educational goals? And so I think that, the unmet need is just a really important flag for us all to consider as we're thinking about, how do we find the students that may need our support and assistance proactively before they find themselves in crisis, before they no longer have secure housing, or before they're so hungry that they have to make a decision that is going to negatively affect their ability to stay in college. And so, I think that we can do a lot to proactively reach out and try to identify resources and supports for these students that reduce their unmet need, but also just ensure that they have the basic needs to live and continue toward their goals.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And, as a first generation student from Eastern Kentucky, coming to college is a whole new world of things to navigate. And I think those resources are very important, because I know that I made my own mistakes along the way. And, I think the more we can educate students from the beginning, super important. And, unmet financial need and financial wellness is just a big part of that as a whole. So thank you, Dr. Matthew McKinley, for joining us today. Next, I'm going to go to Dr. Turner and pose the same question of why is unmet financial need addressing that important for students in Kentucky as a whole?
I'd answer that a couple different ways. We're a state that we need to grow, and we need to grow with people who have undergraduate degrees or post-secondary education and that experience. And so the more people we can get to cross that stage with a post-secondary credential, we know all the different kind of social and economic benefits to a more populated state with a larger degree of education. And so I know at UK, and I know our sister institutions across the state share this goal. To advance Kentucky, is the pathway is through more and more degrees. And if we know on our watch that unmet need is one of the things that trips people up, the more creative we can get in our solutions to lower that barrier so that we can get that overall goal of more degrees, then it's the onus is on us to do that. Two pieces that I would also just underscore: when we first implemented the UK leads, we had people on campus, not just at UK, but nationally. You see this, that more and more money is going towards merit aid rather than maybe financial need. And we had people who questioned that as well. And one of the things that I really want to stress whenever I do these types of talks about unmet need is our students who have need are also meritorious, that they're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. It's not taking money from merit-based aid and moving it towards financial. It is, we have lots of students in Kentucky who are both meritorious and also have financial need. And so I always want to kind of stress that, because I think sometimes those options are presented as in a dualistic way, and they're not. The other piece, and it's hearkening to what Dr. Massey McKinley just talked about, but we also know that, at least at UK, our 4 different areas that we talk about in terms of a pathway to student success, we visualize them in a kind of a swirl, because we know that things like unmet need impact all 4 of those reasons why students might get tripped up. And so a student might not actually have a basic need or might not have emergency funding that they have, but they're working 3 jobs because they have unmet needs. So they're able to kind of balance it, if you will, if you call that balance. But they are, if you're working a couple jobs, you can't go to the tutoring center, you can't go to the different clubs and activities to be part of the community, and you might fall sick. And so we also know that students and their families are making really tough decisions, and they might just barely be able to make it. And so there's all sorts of anxiety and stress about if one of those balls was to drop. And so part of solving for unmet need, even if someone hasn't raised their hand and said, hey, I need help, part of that is trying to be proactive in the solution, because it helps to balance out all the other aspects of barriers, or if you look at it through a growth view, opportunities that a student can take advantage of or may get tripped up by while they're trying to on that pathway to that degree. So that's the other issue in terms of trying to be proactive in solving for unmet need, knowing the interactions, even if a student, it looks as if the student is trying to balance it all.
Thank you. And, we touched earlier on Kentucky's 60 by 30 goal, and an important way that you identified to reach that is to remove that financial barrier so we can get more degrees for the state to meet that goal. So I really appreciate your insight in that question. Last but not least, I'm going to ask Dr. Lefford the same question. Why is unmet need important to students and Kentucky?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the most important aspect of working together to reduce unmet need is increasing student opportunity. And that's where we have to stay laser focused. And I would add to what the others have said, I really enjoy how this discussion is kind of focused on individual level needs rather than kind of aggregate data. And I would encourage folks to kind of think about these issues through those lenses. For example, I think about a story that one of our institutional partners just told me at a recent meeting on this very topic. That institutional leader described a student who was one of the most brilliant he'd ever met, first time student. He said he already knew he was one of the most brilliant students he'd ever met. He's constantly wowing his teachers, but he was underperforming on just kind of remedial, weekly assignments, and was having performance issues because of the cognitive drain and the stress over how he was going to pay for school. And I think it's really important to think about that and how that brings into account all the other life circumstances that go into unmet need, like Dr. Madison McKinley mentioned. But if you think about that student, if you think about individual level students like that, and then what a difference we can make if we can work together, quantify that need, and then figure out an efficacious way to help that student and the thousands of others like Dr. Turner mentioned. Unmet need is not it's not biased. It affects everybody regardless of their merit. But anyway, I asked that colleague of mine, what would a little assistance impact? How would that impact that student? And he told me that young student would probably go on to a research institution and change the world. And that's powerful. That's a pretty strong example, obviously, but that story is the exact same for so many others, regardless of what their dreams are, where they're going to go in their life. We have a great opportunity with our longitudinal data system and model that we've built to help students retain, to get that information out with our institutions and work together to help those students complete their degrees and ultimately open doors to social mobility and a better life and a better Kentucky, right? Those folks, whatever their dreams are, they deserve our best. So let's keep having these important discussions. This has been great. Let's keep using data to improve the post-secondary experience for our aspiring young students. Thanks so much, Blake.
Thank you. I wanted to thank all of our speakers for joining us today. I feel like this was a very insightful discussion on unmet need and its importance for students and for our state. We do have some time for some questions, so I want to go through these. If you have any questions, feel free to put that in the Q&A and we'll try to touch on that in the 15 minutes that we have. But the first one I want to pose to the group, and anyone can feel free to jump in and grab this, but someone asked, does the FAFSA unmet need calculation accurately and fairly identify a student's real need?
I can take that one. So the question was, does the financial aid application accurately and fairly identify a student's real need? In my opinion, it does not. And a lot of that hinges on the expected family contribution component, which is a component of the unmet need calculation. And it's my understanding, up until it was recently revised, that calculation took into account a family's assets and a lot of other things that we wouldn't really consider money that one could move, such as to pay for an expense like college. So I think, in my opinion, the FAFSA, as part of its prior calculation setup, would greatly underestimate unmet financial need for a lot of students. But I'm not completely up to date and up to speed on those revisions, but from the kind of 40,000 foot view, it's my understanding that some substantial revisions to the EFC calculation will open the door for more students to access financial aid and grant awards.
Thank you. Dr. Madison McKinley or Dr. Turner, do you have anything to add to that? Nope. Okay, great. Next question. Someone posted that they work with students and there can be a lot of information asymmetry that goes on that can exacerbate student stress at pivotal times. College is a lot of information. So in the process of conducting this study, and I'm not sure if they're talking about Chris's study or UK lead, so either of them can maybe speak to this, but was consideration given to the regional distribution of students experiencing financial needs? So did you look at this from any kind of geographical distribution when looking at the data?
I'm happy to take it as it relates to UK leads, and then defer to my colleague in terms of the statewide study. When we look at UK leads, the model puts that into, we have about, I want to say it's about 30 or so different variables that go into the model. There are geographic pieces that are in that model. Every variable has been shown to be statistically relevant in terms of persistence and graduation. One of them is the number of miles away from the institution. So that doesn't necessarily get at where particularly within the state, but it does in terms of the number of miles away from the main campus in Lexington. There are also issues, some of the variables in there are things like first generation and other types of demographic variables within our model. What we have found is that the model tends to and these are the people, this is the model that talks to us. It tells us who are the students who have the highest unmet need, and if you don't solve for it, they're not as likely to persist. It tends to be represented by Kentuckians and first generation. And so we know that, at least for our students, unmet need impacts those students more acutely. In fact, one year that we did this, it was 100%. We didn't have the model did not spit out anyone who wasn't a Kentuckian. So in terms of the geographic distribution within the state itself, we can look at that more closely. We do have unmet need based on each county. I could tell you what the unmet need is for each one of our counties and what the average unmet need is for each one of our counties. But we really let the statistical model, do the talking for us in terms of who gets selected for the LEADS program.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Mass-McKinley would like to add something.
Yeah, I thought I saw some also in that question, just an element of communications and how do we let students know proactively about the resources that exist on campus that they may be eligible for or can take advantage of. And a part of our basic needs work has actually involved two things. It's involved an asset map of all basic needs resources and supports in Kentucky for all 49 higher ed institutions in Kentucky, as well as deep dive interviews with program administrators on 9 of our campus partners. And what we saw, what the researchers saw through their project was that there was a pretty significant discrepancy between what information is available online and what resources actually exist if a student knows the right person to talk to. And so I think that there is a really important element of enhancing our communications, not just kind of passively, can you find it online, although that is essential, but also how are we potentially doing benefits eligibility screening for our incoming students or basic needs screening, or even just really understanding the broad financial wellness of our students related to their habits of borrowing or spending and those kind of things. So I think that there's a lot of proactive steps that we can take, both as a state, collaborating around this issue of basic needs supports, and also institution specific to increase our communications with students about what's available to support them.
Thank you.
I can add a little perspective on the state study. We didn't quite get down to the county level, but one important thing to note about our model, I'm not sure if I said it at the onset, but we only looked at in-state students so that we could work with our post-secondary partners. So just looking at Kentucky, first-time Kentucky students, we found that there was certainly kind of a skewness toward higher levels of unmet financial need from students that hail from that XEP or the Eastern Kentucky workforce region. But the other part of that was a question about the communication and students not knowing what's available to them. Both when I was working in an institution and now we know that in some institutions, 40% of first-time students don't fill out that application and they don't know what aid they have available to them. And many of them, as we've heard today, would get some sort of aid. I personally, speaking for myself, I'm, really excited to see here and elsewhere folks considering and at least thinking about, could we maybe do this, make it a graduation requirement at the high school level? I don't know if that's the best policy outcome or not, but it's encouraging to me that folks understand this issue and are paying attention to it. But just to wrap it up, coming from a post-secondary institution, I was privileged to be able to see a lot of great groundwork going on with folks having FAFSA days at their kind of regional campuses or local main campus, and really engaging with students and their families out in the community to bring those folks into a nice environment and have folks on hand to help them out with filling out that application. It's a tough one. It's intimidating. It's my understanding that they've reduced that quite a bit, and hopefully that helps going forward. But on that communication piece, I think that community outreach and stuff like FAFSA days or workshops where we can engage with students and their families and help them out and get those awards that they might not be aware of has really been helpful.
Great, thank you. We have one last question, and I think this is specifically for Dr. Ledford. Someone asked, how do we get to use the model?
Hey, Chris, that's a good question. We're still working that out. So we do have this, the question is about, how can institutions engage with this predictive model that we've built? I don't quite know the answer to that yet, as we just had a meeting with our IR teams a few weeks ago, and we just started these conversations with those folks, and definitely want to keep having those conversations. Something that we've kind of been batting around so far is, we can do a lot of things with user interfaces that will integrate with statistical software, where folks can upload some data and then, run it against a model and get some sort of output back without any effort on their part, for lack of a better term. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know, how exactly that will be set up, but that's kind of the direction we're going. We know we can do it. It's just a matter of how. Certainly, if somebody wants to reach out and kind of talk about that further, I can definitely do that on an individual level while we're working to that ultimate point of having some sort of portal or something that folks can load data into. Hope that answered your question, Chris.
Thank you. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. I wanted to thank our speakers for coming today and sharing their wonderful insights on unmet financial need and kind of the student experience as a whole. I really enjoyed getting to hear about how it not only affects students from an outcomes perspective, but kind of holistically in their college experience. If you have any questions, is there one more question? So Dr. Turner, what does UK call their lead scholarship when they package it for students?
Yeah, thank you. That's called the Kentucky Futures Award. So when we first did leads, they were pilot projects, and we were looking at that to see about how you might do it over a course of 4 years. So our leads scholarships right now are just a year-to-year basis. We've been able to to keep it for every year that the student is enrolled with us, and as well as add more students to that. But we originally designed it as a pilot project, thinking about moving it towards a 4-year commitment scholarship that you would give a student in their senior year of high school as part of their 4-year financial aid package with us. As we've walked this over the last 6 or 7 years, what we've realized is we need both. We need the 4-year commitment that we use based on a lot of the UK leads model that we had already developed. And we still believe that we need that one-time grant each year, looking at students' unmet need. So we've moved forward with kind of parallel tracks, both with the kind of upfront 4-year scholarship that we put in the financial aid package, and then we also, in October of every year, and there's a reason why we do it in October of every year, we run the UK leads model of students who still have that unmet need that's below the 5,000 or that's above the 5,000 threshold, and start to try to scholarship them down below that 5,000. So the Kentucky Futures is the 4-year, the UK leads is the one-time grant that we do each year in October.
Great, thank you, Dr. Turner. Lily, do you want to speak to this question? Someone asked if the basic needs asset map is something posted online.
Yes, well, it's not posted online right now, but I just responded to that question. And so does that go out to everybody? The response I posted? That we're actually having a webinar on the faculty campus voice research project around student basic needs on May 23rd. And that webinar will be, so it's May 23rd from 10 to 11:30 Eastern time, and individuals, I'll put it in the chat, everyone. Oh, fantastic. So you can register to attend, and we will be posting both the asset map as well as the recommendations around a state plan for basic needs supports moving forward following that meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
We're out of time. If anyone has any further questions, I think most everyone on this call should have my email or Dr. Ledford's email. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And if we can't answer, we will get the answers for you. But I hope you learned something today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. We will see you all later.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks, everybody.